This story may be deeply disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Imagine this. Your 3-year-old daughter vanishes without a trace while you're on vacation in a foreign country. The world watches as her face appears on every newspaper, every screen, every street corner. A nation holds its breath. And then, just days after her disappearance, while the search is still raw and hope still clings to the air, her father quietly removes a refrigerator from their rented villa and takes it to the local dump. He doesn't tell the owner, he doesn't call for help, he just hauls it away. Why? The blog post where he supposedly described this act? Deleted. Gone, just like her. In May 2007, in Praia da Luz, Portugal, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort, while her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were having dinner nearby. The case ignited an international firestorm, one of the most followed missing person stories in modern history. But amid the noise, interviews, appeals, fundraising, media campaigns, there was one theory that refused to fade, not because it was proven, but because no one could explain it away. It started with a scent only trained cadaver dogs could detect, a scent found in the trunk of the rental car the McCanns hired 24 days after their daughter vanished, DNA samples, odors of human decomposition, and a broken refrigerator that may have once stored more than just food. Today we go beyond the headlines, beyond the abduction posters, into the coldest corner of this story. Because the questions that still haunt this case aren't just about who took Madeleine, but about what might have happened before anyone realized she was gone. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the car, before the dogs, before the blog vanished. Let's meet the little girl the world lost too soon. Madeleine Beth McCann was born on May 12, 2003 in Leicester, England. She was the first child of Kate and Jerry McCann, and from the moment she opened her eyes, she lit up the room. With striking blue-green eyes and a curious heart-shaped face, Maddie, as everyone called her, had a presence that made her hard to forget. Her hair, a soft golden brown, framed a face full of life and questions. Her laugh, light and unfiltered, was the kind that made strangers smile. She was just days away from her 4th birthday when she vanished. Maddie loved books. Her favorite was The Tiger Who Came to Tea. She could spend hours flipping through its pages, pointing to pictures, making up her own stories. She adored animals, especially cats, and dreamed of having a kitten. Her days at nursery were filled with energy, giggles, and an insistence that she would become a doctor like her mother, or maybe a footballer like her dad. She had a quirk that melted hearts. When excited, she would tap her hands against her thighs and bounce up and down, unable to contain her joy. At bedtime, she always needed her cuddle cat, her soft, plush toy, with her. She wouldn't sleep without it. That toy was found clutched in her bed, untouched the night she disappeared. Friends described her as polite, warm, and chatty. Teachers said she was quick to comfort a crying classmate and quick to ask questions that only a child could phrase so innocently. Her younger twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, followed her everywhere, their little eyes locked on their big sister, their guide. But what made Madeleine unforgettable wasn't just how she looked or acted. It was how fiercely she was loved. Her parents didn't just talk about her, they clung to her memory. Every interview, every statement, every plea carried the same undercurrent, that Madeleine was not just a child missing, but a child deeply missed. And it's this love, the raw, aching love of a family torn apart, that would become both the force behind a global search and the fuel for 1,000 suspicions. Because when a child like Maddie disappears, the world doesn't just lose a name, it loses a heartbeat. To the outside world, the McCanns looked like a portrait of stability. Kate and Jerry McCann were both accomplished professionals, Kate a general practitioner, and Jerry a cardiologist. Their lives, until that moment in May 2007, had been meticulously built: careers in medicine, 3 beautiful children, a tight-knit group of friends, and a modest but comfortable home in Rothley, Leicestershire. Their marriage was private, low profile, but not without the weight that comes with raising 3 young children, including twins, while juggling demanding careers. Still, by all accounts, they made it work. They took turns, leaned on family, and planned holidays like the one in Portugal to recharge as a family. The trip to Praia da Luz was just that, a break. 7 other adults and their children joined them, friends from their medical circles. They called themselves the Tapa 7, named after the resort restaurant where they dine nightly, rotating shifts to check on the children sleeping in their respective apartments. It was a routine born of familiarity and trust, and perhaps one born from the illusion that nothing bad could ever really happen to people like them. Kate and Jerry were devout Catholics. Their faith became a lifeline during the darkest moments, but in the eyes of Portuguese investigators, their composure sometimes read differently. Jerry was meticulous, methodical. Even during the most emotional of interviews, Kate was stoic, restrained. To many, these were signs of strength. To others, they were unnerving. When Madeleine disappeared, the McCanns mobilized immediately. They reached out to authorities, friends, media. They didn't wait for others to act. They stepped into the public eye, not as grieving parents curled in silence, but as strategists, calm, articulate, almost managerial in their grief. Within days, their faces were everywhere. Within weeks, they had their own spokesperson, a fundraising website, wristbands, billboards. To some, this response was understandable, a desperate family doing everything to find their daughter. But to others, especially in Portugal, it seemed too composed, too calculated, especially as inconsistencies began to surface in the timeline and cracks appeared in the group's statements. By September 2007, just 4 months after Maddie vanished, both Kate and Jerry were named arguidos, formal suspects, in her disappearance. It was a moment that fractured public opinion. To some, it was a cruel twist in an already unbearable nightmare. To others, it raised long simmering questions about what really happened inside apartment 5A that night. But to understand how those questions grew, we need to revisit the night of May 3rd and the eerie 24 days that followed. May 3rd, 2007. The sun dipped behind the cliffs of Praia da Luz, casting long shadows across the Ocean Club resort. That evening, the McCanns and their friends followed their usual routine, dinner at the Tapas restaurant just 100 yards away, while the children slept inside their respective apartments. Every 20 to 30 minutes, one parent would go check on the kids. At 10 p.m., Kate McCann returned to apartment 5A, and Madeleine was gone. The window was open, the shutters were raised, but there was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no sounds of struggle, just Madeleine's empty bed, and her cuddle cat still resting on the pillow. Panic erupted. Resort staff and fellow tourists joined the search. Police arrived, albeit slowly. By the next morning, the word was out. A child had vanished. Flyers, interviews, press conferences followed. The story reached London, then New York, then the world. But as the days passed, something about the timeline started to trouble investigators. Between 2:00 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. on the day of Madeleine's disappearance, there was no independent confirmation of her whereabouts, not from staff, not from passersby, not from surveillance footage. The only people who claimed to have seen her alive during those hours were the McCanns and their friends. At first, police clung to the abduction theory, but 24 days later, something shifted. On May 27th, the McCanns rented a silver Renault Scenic from a budget office in nearby Lagos. Practical perhaps, but also a strange move for a family still under investigation. And that's when the dogs arrived. 2 highly trained British sniffer dogs, Eddie, specialized in cadaver detection, and Keela, trained to locate blood, were brought to the scene. Eddie alerted inside apartment 5A. Then, both dogs signaled in the boot of the Renault Scenic, not once, not hesitantly, but with precision. Cadaverine, the chemical released during human decomposition, was present. Blood traces followed. Forensic tests revealed a degraded DNA sample matching Madeleine's profile with 88% certainty. Not conclusive, but disturbingly close. The Portuguese heat that month soared above 40 degrees Celsius. A body left exposed for even a few days would have decomposed rapidly, attracting insects, releasing fluids, and producing an unmistakable odor. Yet the scent in the car's trunk, nearly a month after Madeleine disappeared, suggested something else: preservation. Police began asking a chilling question. Was Madeleine's body stored somewhere before being moved? And that's when the refrigerator theory surfaced. A blog post, allegedly written by Jerry McCann, mentioned him personally disposing of a broken refrigerator from their rental villa. The post was soon deleted, erased from the official website. No one could verify its original text. Only fragments remain, quoted in online forums. But the detail haunted investigators. Why would a father, amid a global manhunt for his daughter, concern himself with a malfunctioning fridge? The idea seemed grotesque, unthinkable. But for Portuguese lead detective Gonçalo Amaral, it was a possibility he had seen before. Just 2 years earlier, he had worked a case involving an 8-year-old girl whose killers froze her body to conceal the timeline of her death. Amaral believed Madeleine's case bore eerie similarities. The Renault wasn't rented until nearly a month after she vanished. That left a 24-day gap, a window in which a body, if hidden, could have been kept cold. A fridge, a freezer, a second apartment, something, somewhere, that kept her from decaying until the family had means to move her. The McCanns denied everything. Their spokesperson called the theory utterly ridiculous. They blamed the odor on rotting meat, shrimp, dirty diapers. But cadaver dogs don't confuse seafood for human remains, and blood detection dogs don't react to beef drippings. Theories spiraled. Critics argued the DNA could belong to her siblings. The blog post might be fabricated, but suspicion had taken root, and it was growing. Because once the scent of death is found, it cannot be unsmelled. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks into months, the investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance transformed into something far more complex than a missing child case. What began with a frantic search became a battle of narratives, fought between two nations, two police forces, and two fundamentally different interpretations of truth. Portuguese authorities, especially lead investigator Gonçalo Amaral, were under pressure. International media flooded the streets of Praia da Luz. Reporters dug for headlines. British tabloids swarmed the case. And yet, the most disturbing leads weren't coming from speculation, but from forensic dogs and a rented car. In July 2007, Eddie and Keela, the British sniffer dogs, alerted inside the McCann's holiday apartment, specifically behind the couch in the living room. Blood traces, cadaverine. Days later, both dogs again responded, this time inside the boot of the Renault Scenic. It was damning. The lab in Birmingham tested the evidence. While results stopped short of being legally definitive, they were close enough to rattle even the most skeptical observers. An 88% DNA match to Madeleine, decompositional fluids, traces that should not have been there. In September 2007, the Portuguese police took a bold step. They officially named both Kate and Jerry McCann as arguidos, formal suspects. The news sent shockwaves across Europe. The parents who had led prayer vigils, fundraising campaigns, and TV appearances were now the subjects of a criminal probe. It was unthinkable. It was horrifying. And yet, to Amaral and his team, it was a necessary turn. They believed the timeline didn't add up. They believed the car, rented 24 days after the disappearance, had carried something more than groceries or diapers. They believed that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A, and that her body had been stored somewhere, possibly refrigerated, until it was moved. But then, the investigation hit a wall. Amaral was abruptly removed from the case in October 2007. Officially, it was due to remarks he made criticizing British police. Unofficially, some believed it was political pressure. The British media, overwhelmingly sympathetic to the McCanns, had painted Amaral as a rogue cop chasing ghosts. His removal shifted the course of the case. By August 2008, the Portuguese authorities shelved the investigation. No charges, no arrests, no resolution. Amaral, unwilling to stay silent, published a book, The Truth of the Lie. In it, he outlined his theory in detail, that Madeleine died accidentally, and her parents concealed the death to protect their image and their family. The McCanns sued him for libel. The legal battle would drag on for nearly a decade, becoming almost as famous as the case itself. In 2017, the Portuguese courts ruled in Amaral's favor. The book was not defamation. It was his interpretation of the evidence. Through it all, the McCanns maintained their innocence. "There is absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead," Jerry said in an interview. "And there is absolutely no evidence that we were involved in her disappearance." And he was right, at least legally. No body was ever found, no confession ever made, and no court ever tried Kate or Jerry McCann. But in the eyes of many, something still didn't sit right. The fridge, the DNA, the dogs, the 24-day gap. The legal system had spoken, but the silence around what really happened remained deafening. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann did more than dominate headlines. It divided nations. Across living rooms, online forums, and television debates, people weren't just wondering what happened, they were choosing sides. In the United Kingdom, the McCanns were largely seen as victims, a brave couple facing every parent's worst nightmare. Their dignified media appearances, their steady public statements, and the full-time presence of Clarence Mitchell, their official spokesperson, shaped a carefully managed narrative. Madeleine had been abducted, and her parents were doing everything in their power to find her. British tabloids often echoed this image. Photos of Kate with a tear-streaked face, Jerry clutching his daughter's stuffed animal. Headlines that screamed of injustice, not against Madeleine, but against her parents, who were now suspects in a country many viewed with suspicion. But in Portugal, the tone was different. Journalists questioned inconsistencies in the timeline. They followed Amaral's refrigerator theory with seriousness. They reported on the 24-day gap, the cadaver scent in the car, the deletion of the blog post about the fridge. And while they didn't outright accuse the McCanns, they did not dismiss the possibility that the answers might lie closer to home than anyone wanted to admit. Online, the debate turned vicious. Thousands of users pored over every detail: blog entries, witness statements, police leaks. Some amateur sleuths saw the fridge story as the smoking gun. Others pointed to behavioral analysis. Why were the McCanns so composed? Why did their friends take months to speak publicly? Why were no fingerprints found on the window shutters supposedly used in the abduction? At the heart of it all was a haunting divide. Was this the story of a family torn apart by tragedy, or something darker? A carefully controlled story, shielded by PR and diplomacy. Amaral's book became a lightning rod. Some saw him as a disgraced detective chasing ghosts. Others saw him as the only man brave enough to say what no one else would, that the timeline, the evidence, and the silence around key details were not just suspicious, they were damning. Petitions emerged. One campaign called for Amaral's reinstatement. Another demanded the British media stop protecting the McCanns. At the same time, thousands raised funds to support the family's private search effort. People wore Find Madeleine wristbands. Children carried her photo in school fundraisers. She became a symbol of hope, of fear, of uncertainty. And through it all, the question never changed. Where is Madeleine? If she was taken, then by whom? If she died, then how? And if someone knew the truth, why haven't they spoken? Because beneath the media storm, beneath the lawsuits and podcasts and online outrage, there was still a child missing, a little girl. And a world unsure whether to mourn her or to keep believing she'd come home. What would you do if your child vanished and the world stopped believing you? That question, whispered in homes across continents, still lingers long after the headlines faded. It lingers because the case of Madeleine McCann is not just about a missing child. It is about the stories we accept, the silences we ignore, and the truths that may never fully rise to the surface. There is no grave to visit, no confirmed scene of death. No trial that closed the book, only fragments, a deleted blog post, a broken refrigerator, a rental car that smelled of something that should never have been there, trained dogs who signaled what no human wanted to admit, and a 6-hour window on a warm spring night when no one, not friends, not staff, not cameras, can say for certain where Madeleine was. What remains is a paradox, a case saturated with data, yet starved of closure. A child whose name became global, yet whose fate remains unknown. Gonzalo Amaral, the detective many dismissed, once asked, if the child was abducted, where is the proof? And if she wasn't, where is the body? His questions were not meant to wound, but to push back against the comforting myths we cling to when the truth feels too heavy. Madeleine Beth McCann would be 22 years old today. She would have had a voice, a future, a life. She might have become a doctor like her mother, or followed her passion for animals. But we will never know. Her story is frozen in time, forever 3 years old, forever missing. We tell her story not to accuse, not to sensationalize, but to remember, to hold space for a little girl the world refused to forget, and to confront the questions we're too afraid to answer. Because somewhere, buried in the silence between timelines and testimonies, between a father's deleted post and the scent in the trunk of a car, lies a truth still waiting to thaw. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there still holds the missing piece.